Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Fund's May edition of From the Shelf with Arnold Kling. I am Shelley Rogers from the web team, and it is my pleasure to have you with us today. This afternoon, we are honored to have our host, Arnold Kling, and our distinguished guest, Virginia Postrel, to join us in this conversation. In about 45 minutes, we're going to open up the discussion for your live questions. Please feel free to use the raise hand feature or the Q&A, and when the time is right, I will push you over to talk live. Arnold, take it away.
Okay, well, it's a real pleasure to have Virginia Postrel here. It's sort of, I think of her as an important teacher of mine, even though she's younger than I. That's because she came to libertarian thinking a lot sooner than I did. And her first book was it was a big influence on me. It's the book about dynamism and stasism and
Right, the future and its enemies.
future and its
Yeah,
enemies.
having
The
a
Lilith and its enemies.
Yeah,
The future
right.
and its enemies. Discussed dynamism and stasism, and maybe after we're finished disposing of this book, we can talk about current events in terms of dynamism and stasism. So the book we're discussing is called The Technological Republic. It's by two Palantir people, one of them the CEO, one of them, I guess, a public affairs person there. There's a lot of discussion nowadays about the sort of intersection between the big tech and politics. So in the news just today in the Wall Street Journal, we can read about Elon Musk's sort of walking out of Washington, D.C. with his tail between his legs. And meanwhile, Mark Zuckerberg, who seems to be quite a weather vane, just signed a deal with Palmer Luckey to supply military headsets to the military, virtual reality headsets or whatever. So there's definitely a lot going on related to these sort of technological republic type issues. But I gather you, Virginia, you were not wildly impressed with the book.
Yeah, well, once upon a time when I was a young reporter at Inc. magazine, this would be around like 1984 or 85, I had an editor who used to drive us crazy because we'd turn in our articles and he would write weak and vague in the back on the side all over. And we were like, this is not weak and vague. I know exactly what I'm trying to say. And I had the feeling throughout this book that it was weak and vague, that they have a message, but they just won't say it. And this is kind of, it feels to me like some kind of smoothie blended by throwing in all the ideas that are popular in certain parts of Silicon Valley and putting them in a blender and coming out with something disgusting. It's really a terrible book. As an author, I'm offended by the existence of this book. Not because I disagree with them on everything. I think they probably have some really important ideas in it, but just because I want my life, the time I spent reading it back. I felt like I was losing brain cells. Let me back up and say,
suppose you were the editor and you said, and you could coach them. What would be the three ideas you would tell them to try to come
right.
across?
Well, I think they have one idea, which is the most sort of, I thought, interesting idea in the sense that it was a little bit new. Most of the ideas in this book are, not new, which is that you have a generation or possibly two of people who have grown up, highly educated, very smart people, technologists, who've grown up in a world that was, by historical standards, quite peaceful, and who take for granted that these things exist sort of in a state of nature, and they think that you can have what I tend to refer refer to as cheap pacifism. That is, it's not real pacifism. It doesn't say, don't fight Hitler. Use nonviolent resistance in all situations. It's just kind of like, we don't really like the military. We don't want to have anything. We don't like the cops. We don't want to, we take for granted that you can have public safety without doing anything mean. So that's one of their ideas that is, I think, especially coming from Palantir, which is a military contractor. It would be interesting to have a book that develops that idea and that talks about people like the authors who dissent from that kind of ruling consensus in the sort of average person working at Google kind of thing, and why they dissent from it and how they built the company. And that would be an interesting book. But you have, I have to read a few things here. Okay, so they're writing about the early internet era. So this is the era that gave us Amazon and Google and all those things. Their touchstone for some reason is e-toys rather than Amazon, because I guess they want something that failed. The failing of that early internet era was its rush to serve the needs of the consumer at the expense of those of the nation state or public. And this is a theme that runs throughout the book, the idea that serving consumers is bad, and that serving the nation state or the public is good. And not only that it's good, but that like everybody should do it. That it's bad that, this is not an argument for an ecosystem, technological ecosystem where you have Palantir and you also have Amazon. This is an argument where everything should be Palantir, which seems a little absurd. And also they talk throughout the book about this notion that we're too agnostic. We don't have an idea of the good, what the good should be. And yet they never do the hard work of saying, like, okay, suppose the world were different from the world you are criticizing. What's the world you want? At times they hark back to the sort of post-World War II period, but at other times they rail against conformity, and of course that period was known for its cultural conformity. It's just a very strange book.
Yeah, I said it sounds like some of it could have been written by sort of an alienated humanities professor railing against the kids who are going to go to work for Goldman Sachs or something.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, they definitely think nobody should work in finance, and or nobody's smart anyway, that it's a waste of their brain power. But I think it's unfair to humanities professors. You had a great line on in your review about this is like a classics professor 1985 railing against this, and but the level of rigor that you would get from a classics professor is not evident in this book.
All right, so let's turn from a little bit. So your book had this distinction between dynamism and stasism, and the point was that left and right were no longer useful distinctions. And that seems to be especially true now, where, on the left, what's the most, it book of the last few weeks? It's something called Abundance by
Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson.
Derek Thompson, and that book sounds. I haven't read it. You.
I have read it. In fact, I reviewed it in Reason. So if people want it.
So does it qualify as being on the Dynamist
side?
Well,
it's interesting. So there is this very interesting phenomenon right now, which is the sort of progress and abundance movement, and people who lean more left, and they're not very far left, they're sort of center left, tend to use the word abundance. And the people who lean more right or libertarian tend to use the word progress. But in my view, it's part of the same intellectual phenomenon. There are differences among the different people. It's definitely an alliance. It's not some sort of narrowly defined.
It's people who've been thrown under the bus by both parties.
Right, right. Yeah, well, there is some truth to that. And I also think it's long term. And it reminds me of some of the things that were happening in the late 70s and early 80s, where you had people across party lines or traditional lines, working on the problems of the day. What I would say about what Ezra Klein says, and it's the punchline of my review, is in The Future and Its Enemies, I distinguish between dynamists who really embrace a bottom-up idea of the future, trial and error, feedback, experimentation, the sort of thing you see in science and markets, all these sort of emergent phenomena, and who tend to be very hands-off. And I distinguish them from two different types of stasis, as I call them. One are your reactionaries who want to go back to an idealized past, or really whose central value is stability. And then what I call technocrats, whose central value is control. And that is, they're for the future, but they have an idea of it should look exactly like this. And technocrats are in, liberal Western democracies. They dominate everything. I mean, they're the majority. And part of what happens depends on, who can peel off the most technocrats. And I think what we're seeing right now is there's like a split in the technocrats. And someone like Ezra Klein, he literally told me, I'm a technocrat. I read your book and I'm a technocrat. So Derek Thompson, I think, is a little less completely technocratic than Ezra Klein. But that sort of progress and abundance movement represents a coalition of dynamists and some technocrats. But then you also have a coalition, and you see it very much in the sort of MAGA coalition of technocrats, a different kind of, they have different values, and what I call reactionaries, which are the people who want to go back to an imagined past. And in the MAGA coalition, that includes people like Trump himself, whose imagined past is kind of the 1950s, or J.D. Vance, when everybody worked in a factory and had union wages, which is all a false picture of the past. But anyway, we can go, and people who are, want to go back to the pre-Reformation medieval past, where everybody was a Catholic and the church had
the question of where it all went wrong.
Right. Yeah. There's
many
a
different
disagreement.
answers.
Yeah. I mean, one thing about reactionaries is they all disagree on where things went wrong. One of the very odd things about this book is that they actually quote a lot of people that I would characterize as sort of reactionaries, all of whom are left reactionaries, not right reactionaries, even though this book would be kind of like coded right, because they're like pro-defense and pro-law enforcement and all, but they don't like markets, and they quote favorably a lot of people. Michael Sandel is one of their favorites. That woman, I can never remember her name, the Italian economist who,
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, two
Mariana Mark.
Yeah. Anyway, it's full of quoting, left-coded people saying markets are terrible. And,
Well, what do you think about that? I mean, on the left, again, you have this division between what I consider the under the bus crowd of Ezra Klein, the under the bus people who can tolerate some deregulation,
right.
and then everybody else. And then on the right, it's not all, the pro-free market crowd is also under the bus.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Well, there are people who are in the Trump coalition because they think that he is going to, lift the heavy hand of the state from business and let people do things, let people build, let people pump oil, let people, run their businesses. I think they're deluded because I think that, he will let, I don't think that's what motivates him. I mean, I don't think that's how he sees the world. I think
If they buy enough Trump coin.
exactly. I mean, there are some people who will be, but it's certainly not a spontaneous order kind of idea. It's I'm the department store and I set the prices and everybody comes to me, to paraphrase a quote that he said about tariffs recently. But it's certainly the case that there are out and out, people who consider themselves libertarians who are sufficiently anti-elitist, anti-technocracy, who have embraced Trump, or at least are anti-Trump. I mean, one prominent person comes to mind is Glenn Reynolds, Instapundit, very likes the future, wants to go to space, all that kind of stuff. And at least at one point would have called himself a libertarian, but he's so, there is a very strong anti-elitist streak in the, I would say it's the dominant streak in the Trump coalition, and that sometimes manifests itself by pulling in, people who traditionally would have liked markets. Yeah.
Well, I like the Alana Newhouse kind of dichotomy between people who are brokenists, just think that all these institutions are broken, and that it seems like Trump brought into his cabinet, just sort of everybody who takes that view.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's not just that people think institutions are broken; they think that what you do when institutions are broken is blow them up.
Yeah. So, speaking of that, another topic that's very much prominent these days is the Harvard controversy.
Yeah.
Do you have a dog in that fight?
Well, my dog in that fight is FIRE,
Right.
of which I've been on the board of FIRE for a million years.
You can spell out the acronym.
Yeah, so it now stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. It was born as the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. It has in very recent years, I think 3 years maybe, become a more general free speech group, not just focusing on campuses, but of course right now campuses are a big deal. And I would associate myself with Steve Pinker at Harvard on this, which is there are plenty of things to criticize about Harvard, but and it is possible that the result of this fight may be some needed reforms, but the idea that you're going to have the government decide, not just the government is too broad, a small group of people in the White House decide who they hate and go after them, go after their speech, go after their contracts, go after their graduate students, go after the scientific enterprise because they hate them. That seems to me to be extremely dangerous, more dangerous than anything bad Harvard has done. And Harvard has done plenty of bad things. I mean, when FIRE has done its free speech ratings the last couple of years, Harvard has been last. So, there's plenty of room for reform, but the whole idea that what will make America great is to destroy our great universities, make it impossible for them to brain drain the rest of the world and bring the best minds to America, make it impossible for people who have come to America for those to stay in America. I mean, this all just seems like shooting yourself in the foot.
or even a higher place than that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
It's
It's sort of a suicide bomber approach.
yeah. Um, so, all right. Well, who are the good guys on the right these days? If there's any, I mean, you talk about this MAGA coalition.
Yeah.
I mean, would you be willing to put these two Palantir people on the good guy side, or are they
Well, I
too
don't
hostile to
know them.
market?
I can't tell from their book. I mean, if I were judging only from the book, I would put them on the bad side because the book is riddled with exactly the kind of anti-market, anti-commerce, anti-consumer, anti-pursuit of happiness rhetoric that has defined the bad guys since at least the days of Adam Smith. On the other hand, I also think the book is so bad and such an intellectual mess that I'm leery of categorizing them without having actual conversation because they clearly also, you started by asking this question of if I were the editor, what would I say? What kind of book? One idea was this idea of, the complacent, this is sort of like A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson's speech about there need that guy on that wall. The complacent generation that takes for granted peace and security and doesn't think about what you need to maintain those things. That would be one way. Another would be to talk about Silicon Valley. There are all these tantalizing hints at the idea that Silicon Valley started out as a place that nurtured nonconformists. People we might say are on the spectrum today. That people who were very smart, who didn't fit in with the traditional corporate kind of, go along, get along approach, who could be very blunt spoken, maybe a little abrasive, but could do great things. And that over time, something happened in Silicon Valley where those people are still there, but they're not dominant. I mean, they don't ever actually say this because what they do is on one page, they say, Silicon Valley is all great because it has these people. But there's this sense that it's not like that. It's too conformist now. So I would like another way you might do that is to tell that story, but it would require real detail, and it would also require deciding, which they don't, whether the personal computer revolution and specifically Steve Jobs and Apple with its roots in the counterculture as well as in tech is a good thing or a bad thing, or a mixed blessing. They tend to say it's a bad thing, and yet it's key to the things they like about Silicon Valley. And partly they're harking back to an earlier, very Silicon, hardware-oriented Silicon Valley. But even in terms of the Defense Department, Hewlett-Packard wouldn't do defense work, not because they were against defense or thought the military was bad, but because they didn't want the kind of corporate distortion that came from being a defense contractor. So another interesting story would be, how does Palantir avoid that? How are they not, McDonnell Douglas or, Hughes or one of these companies?
That was a question I had because I've seen, when I was with Freddie Mac, it was a big organization. And we were looking to get some software built. And there was this small company that basically had already done what we needed. And so we went, we subjected them to meeting after meeting after meeting. And then in the end, went with, I forget which big contractor. It was like
Right.
maybe Perot's Data Systems.
Oh, right. Yeah, probably. Yeah, back in.
And just like,
Yeah, and they tell this very interesting story about how soldiers in Iraq needed, or maybe it was Afghanistan, but anyway, they needed defenses against IEDs. And this is a big data problem. If you had all the data, I mean, the data existed, that if you could like analyze it quickly and well, you could avoid, casualties of American troops. And basically, the people wanted Palantir, and there is a way. They tell the story in the book about how that became possible for, Palantir to sell that product.
But I think that's often true in wartime. The
Yeah.
peacetime generals know how to work the system.
Yeah.
And the wartime generals figure out how to work the
Right.
war, and so the bureaucracy tends to break down a little bit
Right.
in war. But I had exactly that same question: is how are these
Yeah.
people with the move fast and break things mentality going to get
Right.
along with government? And
Yeah.
in fact, when Musk signed up, I gave him, I thought he'd be gone by July, and I could have taken the under on that.
Yeah.
Did you expect anything to come out of Musk and Doge?
So also, we mentioned I reviewed Walter Isaacson's very good biography of Musk. So I find Vivek, like many people, I find Vivek Ramaswamy like the most irritating and annoying person on earth, basically. But I thought it was a terrible thing when he left that effort, because he was really focused on regulation, which is a case where I think they might have made a difference. Once he left and it became Musk, and it became about supposedly saving money, but in this very ham-handed way, I became much more pessimistic. I think that there may be some long-term effects, and they're not necessarily good. I suspect partly through Doge and even more through a lot of the anti-immigrant, the immigration enforcement things. What's happening is a lot of databases that were separate for good reasons, like, you're supposed to report your illegal gains to the IRS. Like, if you're a drug dealer, you're supposed to report, I made such and such money selling crack cocaine and methamphetamine, and here is the taxes I paid on. That's the law, and the IRS is supposed to not care about your ill-gotten gains, whatever. But now the IRS data is becoming, and two people quit over this. They're mixing it with all these other data sets and other ones as well. And I think what we're going to end up with, and Doge has partly, I think, pushed this along, is an AI and much more powerful AI-enabled surveillance of using big data to surveil citizens. It's going to start with, we're looking for illegal immigrants, but 20, 30 years from now, what's it going to look like? So I'm a little pessimistic about that.
Yeah. What are some scenarios for the future of sort of technology and government?
Yeah, well, I do think, and I should say on a positive note, Dean Ball, who is great AI analyst, I've interviewed him on my website. He has gone to work in the White House as their chief AI person. So I feel a little better having him there, because he's very, very thoughtful and very humane, and very, he's just a generally good person. I think we are, if I want to make a positive scenario, it is conceivable that some of the sort of Augean stables will get cleaned out. Some good things will get thrown out. We'll be throwing out some babies with some bathwater, but maybe we'll at least get rid of some bathwater. Unfortunately, some of the things I really like to see, like, FDA reform and sort of the Alex Tabarrok agenda at the FDA run counter to the RFK Jr. Agendas. So I'm fairly pessimistic about that. And I consider, pharmaceutical industry to be technology. It's not just about, computers, but and also agriculture and all technology is not just Silicon Valley. I do think there is a growing coalition within the tech community around the sort of Palantir ideas, around the sort of idea that we need the best minds working on defense, because we have the world is a dangerous place, and we have real rivalries with China, and they are leaner and meaner than we've allowed ourselves to be. And so we need to think about that and not cripple technologies that we may need in the future. So that's, I don't know that that's the majority of Silicon Valley, but there's a substantial group, and not all, and it's not all in Silicon Valley. I mean, a lot of it's, say, in Austin.
But again, I think of, Mark Zuckerberg as a weather vane, and while Biden's in office, he's doing one thing. I forget when he got rid of Palmer Luckey, but now Palmer Luckey is back in his good graces, and that says the weather vane's.
I think that had more to do. I don't know the whole story, but I suspect that had to do more with money. But the urban
and the vibe shift of Trump being in office.
Yeah. Well, there's actually an interesting quote from Zuckerberg in this book, which is him saying that people don't appreciate that someone like him just likes to build things, and that he's not. I mean, they're critical of him because they don't like Facebook, they don't like social media, they especially don't like very smart software people spending their lives doing that sort of thing. They see it as trivial. But it's an interesting quote because it suggests if that's really what motivates Zuckerberg, he's not motivated by politics. He doesn't care about, he's just trying to do his thing, and there may be some profit maximization going on there too. And so that would lead a person like this theoretical Zuckerberg, who just likes to build stuff and run his company, would be a weather vane.
No, it does seem like these, there is this mindset of just wanting to go out and do big dramatic things, whether it's, get to Mars, or put us all into virtual reality, or build AI friends for all of us, or whatever. You see that, I just read a recent biography of Sam Altman, and that same, almost megalomaniacal attitude. I mean, you almost like, they're almost bigger megalomaniacs than politicians.
Yeah, well, because politicians, to be successful, also have to be people pleasers in a way that, and this is something that this book gets right, that at least historically, the sort of Silicon Valley set, or engineer, they just call it engineers, they fundamentally, they have to please reality, not other individuals. But one of the most disturbing things, because of my particular, the emphasis in my work about this book, is its belief that certain kinds of things are worthy of attention and others are not. And it's not that I'm a relativist. I mean, I have strong opinions about what's good and bad too, but I have the feeling that if we transported these guys back to 1770, they would think it's stupid to work on spinning machines because it's just about clothes and that's unimportant. I mean, maybe we could go to them and say, wait a minute, we have a Navy, it needs, millions of sheets of sails. This is actually really important. But it's sort of like there's a limited list. There's, weapons,
AI, probably.
AI, going to Mars, but even AI, it would only be for certain applications, presumably. Maybe pharmaceuticals, drugs, healthcare, although there's not much about that in the book. But anything else doesn't count. Photo sharing apps get swiped at. It's a wonderful. It's a wonderful thing that people can share photos, that people can store thousands of photos, that people don't just have to get 36 images and when they're on vacation or their kid is just learning to walk or whatever. Why do we care about defense? Why do we care about the existence of the United States? Why is it a good thing? It has to have something to do with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a very, a complex thing that includes a lot of quote unquote trivial activities.
Yeah, I don't know if we have people ready to ask questions yet, but
We do have one question from John Alpha, if you
okay,
guys are ready.
sure.
Perfect. John, if you'd like to unmute, you can ask your question.
My question is about your brief discussion of Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I'm a fan of Virginia Postrel, have been a long time, but I am surprised at Virginia's tepid view that, quote, there is room for reform at Harvard, end quote. By contrast, Arnold Kling at his Substack has emphasized the need for disruption of higher education, not by government intervention, but by entrepreneurial development of alternative mechanisms of education of talented youths. So questions arise. Are universities broken? Does the residential campus greatly delay adulthood? Are the massive subsidies part of the problem? So might the two of you briefly discuss internal reform versus entrepreneurial disruption as prospects or ways for improving education, coming of age, and career prep of talented youths? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that AI is already disrupting higher education in major ways. Less at the very elite level, where presumably at least some of the students actually want to learn stuff. But we have spent decades, and especially as grades have inflated, training a large cadre of people to write, the sort of stuff that ChatGPT can write in seconds, and we give them, B pluses for it. It's not great. And then they go out and get jobs writing press releases or whatever, and that's going to go away too. I mean, so there's a massive disruption going to take place because one possible outcome, however, may be something that your question suggests you don't like, which is that we may see a lot of schools, not necessarily the very elite school, turn into what I would call finishing schools. The place you go for 4 years or however many years, for a period after high school to go to football games and live away from your parents and, kind of grow up a little bit and get a certain polish, but it's not really about academia. And I actually think a lot of American higher education is more or less that. The students learn something sometimes, but that's very different from Harvard. Although, they do say about Harvard, it's the hard part is getting in. Having been rejected by Harvard, I can believe that. But I went to Princeton, so you can. But there are a few schools where students really focus intensely on their studies, but most students at most universities are not like that. I do think there'll be there is a threat to the existing regime, and that is coming from technology, not from the government. There's also stuff coming from the government. And there are potentially entrepreneurial opportunities too, and I'm all for that. But I think that as we saw back when everything was supposed to turn to MOOCs,
it's massive online.
Yeah, right. This was 10 years ago or so, everything was going to be online. I think especially smart, conscientious people seriously underestimate the value of in-person contact and in-person monitoring, and having somebody who makes sure that you do your homework or they give you a bad grade. And a lot of people need that little push, and that is, otherwise we would all be learning stuff online. And so I think we saw this during COVID when we talk about lost generations of students. The stuff was available online, but people didn't learn. Because there is something about in-person communication that is powerful.
Yeah, and my line is that people are Gerardian. They pay attention to what everyone else is paying attention to. When you're home by yourself, you don't see any other students looking at the teacher.
Yeah, that is one thing.
Going back to, so I agree that I think higher education as a whole has to shrink. I think we went through this period where we said, gee, college kids earn more than non-college kids,
right.
So let's send everybody to college. And I just don't think that worked well at all. I just think there are just a lot of people who don't get a whole lot out of taking the standard, or taking a Harvard style college course that's somehow dumbed down for, a lower level institution. I don't think that's just not the answer. On the issue of Harvard, I'd probably come down on them harder than most people would, certainly harder than Steven Pinker would. I thought Steven Pinker's, he had this famous op-ed, I don't know if it was earlier this week or
last. Yeah, it was
recently. And at one point he's really demagogic. He's saying, well, if you're not against, if you're against Harvard, you're against curing cancer or something. He literally kind of said that. And I think Stanley Kurtz has a good kind of refutation of Pinker's view, which is that Pinker has formed this I forget what he calls it, Academic Freedom Council or something, a small group within Harvard.
Yeah.
A couple of things that one is it's a small group. They're probably way outnumbered by the number of Marxists on the Harvard faculty. I mean, avowed Marxists. Plus, just the fact that you have to establish that kind of council tells you that you've got a big problem. You would, the values of that council should be permeating the entire university, and you shouldn't need it.
Yeah.
And how to get those values to permeate the university again is a major challenge.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, Trump is going to unite, it's going to put Pinker and the Marxists on the same foxhole. And that's,
Matt Iglesias, who is, one of these center left abundance people, it would be one way of thinking of it, had a thing the other day on his Substack saying that he had done something that he had sworn and written several times he would never do, which is that he's graduated from Harvard, that he gave money to Harvard. And he has all these arguments about why, Harvard is a terrible thing to give money to. You should give money to, like, give directly and all of these things. Harvard doesn't need the money. There are better places to give money to. But under current circumstances, he is like voting with his money. He wants to say that this attack on higher education and on the pursuit of knowledge. I mean, I don't think Stanley Kurtz is one of these people. When I met him, I adored him. I can't stand anything he writes, but it's, and I haven't read that article, but I do think that the Trump administration is not, and the support for this within their coalition, it's not about improving higher education. It's not about free speech. It's definitely not about anti-Semitism. It's about, we hate these people. They're not our people. We want to hurt them. And it's not because they're Marxists. They're just as likely to want to hurt, Steve Pinker as hurt, somebody you've never heard of. It's like they are the enemy. They are the people we don't like, and we want to hurt them.
My line is that if Harvard would just name a building Donald Trump Hall and buy and invest 5% of their endowment in Trump coin, he would turn around in a second.
Exactly, absolutely. Although his constituents would still hate Harvard. I mean, I really think that the media trope about people who vote for Trump and people who are really, egging this on is that there are a bunch of, blue collar high school graduates who live in places that are depressed and they want their jobs back. And that's part of the coalition. But I think there are also a huge number of people, particularly in red states. I mean, this is where I'm from, South Carolina, originally, or that's where I grew up, who are college educated, affluent professionals who feel disrespected by the existence of an elite that didn't think that going to the University of Alabama was a great thing to do. And there was a time when they just ignored those people, where they both ignored each other. But as those parts of the country have become more affluent, far more educated, the resentment grows.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I actually think of it as sort of a narrower group of people who resent Harvard. When I go to I went last year to the National Conservative Convention in DC, which was sociologically very interesting. These kids who, instead of wanting to go into tech or whatever, want to go into government. I want to get, have them be lectured at by Karp and the Palantir people. But it was odd. It was just after the debate but I think it was before Biden dropped out. I think that's the situation. So you'd think they should have been like, ecstatic.
Yeah, right. We're going to win by a landslide.
This, really energized. And they couldn't get out of this resentment mode.
Yeah.
And I think even in the White House, these sorts of people cannot get out of their mode of resentment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, George Packer wrote a profile of J.D. Vance, I guess probably in the Atlantic. I was reading it and I was thinking as I was reading it that J.D. Vance's sorry about that, background is in many ways resembles Bill Clinton's background. He's from a dysfunctional blue collar family in an out of the way place, enormously gifted, intellectually and also in terms of getting along with people. Yet the story that Clinton told was the positive story. I still believe in a place called hope. It was like, and this is, and Clinton is a baby boomer. I mean, there's a lot. Whereas the story that Vance tells, especially now, is a story about resentment and being disrespected. Well, I assure you that, because he didn't know, he had to call up and find out which fork to use. I am sure Bill Clinton, when he went to Oxford, did not know every little thing. I mean, he's, yes, he went to, or when he went to Georgetown, he was a smart kid from a small place that was far more isolated than back then than it would be today. But he tells a positive story. Vance tells a negative story. Is that just the difference between baby boomers and millennials? I mean, what is that about? So anyway.
All right. So Shelley, do we have any others that were queued up? Okay.
We don't. John was the only one.
Okay.
I
anything else you want to say?
I thought you might, since you mentioned Renee Girard, who's one of the people that the authors put in their intellectual blender. I thought I would be interested in your take on his influence. I mean, he's enormously influential in this sort of milieu in this Silicon Valley, particularly sort of the Peter Thiel types milieu.
Yeah, it is interesting which kind of the intellectuals that they've seized on. I mean, Thiel actually studied under Girard.
Yeah, right.
Have some explanation of that. Nietzsche, and their particular take on Nietzsche is really odd. It's sort of the master morality versus slave morality. That master morality said that being strong and successful is good, and so you can see like somebody who's a billionaire wants to say that. And slave morality is that's bad, and that you should take the side of the underdog. It's interesting that is a big deal among some of these people. It's it's an interesting topic, and it's sort of I think an earlier generation would have taken more from your book, which I think is sort of is looking at systems in some sense.
Right.
Systems that I mean, this is the way I take it anyway, that you have a system that allows evolution and decentralized trial and error, as opposed to who's a great man or.
Right. I also have a Gerardian book. I mean, it's not influenced by Girard. I never read him or anything, but The Power of Glamour, which is my least popular book, but it's if you're interested in those ideas, you should read that book too, because it's about longing and emulation and rhetoric of a nonverbal kind. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that note, Shelley, if you want to say goodbye to everybody and thank everybody, and Virginia, that was great.
Thank you. It's fun.
Thank you, Virginia, for spending your time with us, and of course, Arnold. We appreciate everything that you do on a monthly basis for EconLib with your book reviews. To our guests, thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and past episodes on our YouTube channel, which is Econ Talk. We will have this episode posted early next week, but please peruse the previous episodes that we have. We have about 2 years or so listed, so there's quite a few viewing options. We will announce our July episode probably in our June newsletter, so be on the lookout for that. To that, thank you very much for joining us, and until next time, thank you.